What up, what up, what up? It's the man Sean P coming in live. This is the Sean P experience on YouTube, man. I am so proud and excited about this guest. Totally, absolutely enjoyed the research process leading up to the show, man. I have on the brother, Stephen Underwood, the new author of the book, Forever for the Culture, Notes from the New Black Digital Age, Arts Renaissance. How you doing, my brother?
I'm good. I'm good. Warm, sunny, optimistic to be here. I'm ready for a conversation. Let's talk.
Yeah, yeah. Let me give you a formal introduction so we get into it, right? So, family, today's guest is hailing from Columbus, Ohio, an award-winning writer with a gift for finding magic in the hypercritical and the truth in every day. He is honest to his experiences, fearless in his storytelling, and intentional how he explores blackness, identity, and belonging. His work has appeared in major platforms like Oprah, NPR, Essence, MTV News, BET, and GQ, and many, many more. But at the heart of it all, he's a storyteller who loves language and lives for imagination. He was a finalist for the Leigh Masson Baldwin's Writers in Residence program. He has two nieces and a nephew who swear they're both smarter than him. That's a good one. And he is building worlds through both nonfiction and fantasy. Welcome to the show, Stephen Underwood.
Hello, hello, hello. I love my own bio. No one tells you that when you work on your bio, that thing is the thing that carries with you every single place you go.
True,
Uh, but
true.
being in like, there's a little joke in my bio that like every time I do a speaking event now, like someone points it out, like this is funny. Like you were referencing the fact that a lot of other authors have like their cats and dogs in in their
Yeah,
bio somewhere. And I was like, I don't have no
yeah,
cat, I have no
yeah.
dogs. I love animals, but I got a niece and a nephew. Two each, and they are very special to me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
They are brilliant. They are great. Shout out to all of them. Out there in
Yeah.
the world. I think they should be in school right now, but I don't know if it's snowing right now or not.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. To be honest, yeah, to be honest, yeah, yeah. Let me ask you about this. So you have appeared in some major platforms that a lot of guests that's watching the show, they want to be a part of things like that. What
Mhm.
would you advise a future writer? Like, how do you get the positioning, even get a chance to be a BT, MTV, Essence? How do these things even manifest?
Um, this is a very interesting question because I was recently asked this for another interview, in another place, but my answer, I think, in that moment, I didn't have a chance to really be more robust to it. I think I can now. My opportunities came at the very start of my writing career because I was on social media. But more importantly, it was because I never really felt like I needed to validate my experiences by getting that accolade or succeeding in that way only. My first publications were on Medium. I think my first official publication was with this thing called Banana Street, where I published an essay on race. I would say like it's all an incremental journey of steps. Every step you take applies to your next thing. Like editors, especially, are looking for a reference to what kind of writing they will get from you, what your approach will be. Sometimes even more so than they worry about like your engagement or like how many clicks they can guarantee on the website. So as long as you're telling good stories and you're making something that speaks honestly to what you want to talk about, and you can put that in front of their face, it's always going to be up from there. I would say also make sure you network, being able to talk to other writers and making sure you are in conversation with them. Make sure you are able to take feedback. You're giving feedback to them, and they're giving feedback back to you. It just turns into an opportunity as their network grows with them. If we're all building as a community, if you're all building as a collective group, you're able to bring everyone else you've ever wanted to work with up with you at the same time. But no, yeah, like my first publication was with MTV News. That it doesn't exist anymore. There's no more MTV News to speak of. But at the same time, if I did not have those Medium articles and I did not just start writing just because I wanted to write and I had an opinion that I wanted to share or a perspective I wanted to share or I wanted to cultivate my instinct as a writer and storyteller, then I would not have got those first opportunities. I think a lot of people worry about following and a lot of people worry about like building their own platform first. But I'm like, at the end of the day, you still have to contribute your writing to something, and you still have to put out finished full pieces that, whether or not they're good or bad, can show that you can finish something.
Thank you very much for that insight, man. Thank you. So this
Of
is the
course.
backside of February. Coming to the close of Black History Month, what does
Hmm.
Black History Month mean to you, first of all? But second of all, in this Black digital age we're in right now, we see what's going on politically around the nation. What does
Hmm.
Black History Month mean now in 2026?
For me, Black History Month has always meant education. That's how my family has always treated it. I come from like a deeply education and hard work centered Black folk, especially out of Philly. Like they instilled in me that Black History Month or even like a Black holiday, if you do get time off, should be dedicated first and foremost to education and recentering what you know and how you can contribute back to your community. So I try to do something educational or a bunch of educational things as much as possible during Black History Month. I also try to embrace like relaxation. I can't say I've been able to do it this month with the book just being out. I've had to step outside and do a lot more in terms of all of that. But I think that it's always constructive to find a way to give back or to apply a sense of mentorship or like collective understanding to Black History Month. I really push even my peers to try to do something that gives back in some way during Black History Month, whether it is like showing up for someone or showing out for someone or finding someone who you feel has been underrepresented and giving them a spotlight. Those are ways that I really feel like Black History Month can really be pronounced. And I think in this day and age, and as we're seeing like a lot of these DEI rollbacks, even though the administration recently announced that they're going to cease the criminalization of DEI statements. Whether or not I believe that's a completely different thing. I think that in 2026, it's an important time for us to challenge that perspective of a lot of different brands that pantomime DEI or diversity and inclusion, but have either shaken themselves or like moved back in terms of where they set the goalposts to be. But also like paying attention to places that do reiterate their focus. Like for me this year, I really wanted to center more Black artists, maybe some people that others might not have met or known. And I launched Brewing Forever with the Spill app because I wanted to work with a Black owned organization and look at new media alternatives to a lot of what we're seeing in social media for the book especially, but overall for like what I feel is a constructive community for Black folk and Black creators. So yeah, I would hope that we all in this year especially, but all years to come, try to build a new understanding of what Black art can be, Black culture can be, and how we consider ourselves rather than centering ownership in other places.
So I love giving authors a chance to give an elevator pitch for their book. I never want to spoil the book, trying to describe it and make an accident. So give us an elevator pitch for Forever for the Culture.
All right, so the elevator pitch was like quite simple and short. It started off as a pitch to my editor at MTV News, Teron Moore, and he was like, "This is a book, Steven. Just write it as a book." I was like, "Okay, cool." I didn't believe him, but then eventually I did get the proposal done. This is Forever for the Culture is about the Black digital arts renaissance that we're currently in its connection to revolution. So I didn't just want to take it away from that element of just talking about Black art or just Black memes, as some people might even just trivialize it to being. I wanted to talk about how the Black Lives Matter movement and how revolution is inherently a part of everything we're doing. A lot of the questions I asked the talent who were so gracious to sit down with me was about what was it like before the woke awakening of America happened. Like, what was it like to make content, and what was it like to be creating during a time like Trayvon Martin's death, and so many different other situations where the online culture was not centering Blackness at all. There's a part of the book I talk about how YouTube at one point did not celebrate Black History Month and did not center Black YouTubers at all. And then there was a sudden change in that, and then suddenly it was everywhere. So talking to people like Cheska Lee and Trey Melvin and even Kenny Knox about a lot of what was going on before the Blackness became widely challenged and accepted, and the institution of racism within America became a thing people were willing to talk about. And then the aftermath of realizing that no, we still have a racial reckoning to deal with. Um, so yeah, revolution inherently a part of this book, and I think every Black arts renaissance that we've ever seen has always been about revolution at its base.
Could you help us define Black arts, especially Black arts in social media and media in general? What is Black arts?
It's folk art. It's the art that you make every single day that people kind of forget about until it becomes a memory you're reaching backwards for. So it's, a bunch of different things. I know some people struggle with the concept that a meme can be an art form, but I think that art in itself by which you make an argument with, right? You take whatever you have in front of you, whether it's words or it's an easel or colors or photography, anything like that, and you make an argument based on your life and your honest truth with that tool. And I think, memes, conversations, threads, a bunch of different things that we see online is just one means for people to do so. We've seen so many content creators who come up and show out like within moments of finding the app themselves. And I think that within this renaissance and within this period, we're seeing people come to in real time realizations or in real time arguments that they're able to structure and put together using the digital medium itself to paint a picture overall. I think that this renaissance is also defined by the amount of people. Like there's more content creators popping up right now that can speak honestly and earnestly to the experiences that they're going through and how racism and race and anti-blackness and a bunch of different isms has impacted them and are very successful at what they do. But there's just so many now, and it defines everything that we're able to build upon. An entire art form can be built within 3 days. By the end of the week, it's already old and already memorable. And so, for that reason, like I think that we're defined by the amount of people who are popping up, the sheer differences between all of us, the arguments that we're able to make with the art in front of us, but also like the disagreements that we get into about what encompasses that information and what is of vital importance for the now and what does it mean to Black people overall.
In a day and time right now where everybody's trying to go viral, everybody's trying to be the next star in that thing, how do you decide what is a movement versus like what's just a moment in time? How does that get separated?
I think it's the seriousness that people apply to the art that they're doing in the first place. That's what actually one of the first questions I asked myself when I was trying to figure out who to interview and who to talk about. Because I think we feel not everything we see constitutes as art. Some of it is real touch and go. It's the difference between media. It's the difference between like just what you might call just a trash post. Um, and what I came to was that digital artists are people who take themselves to a level of seriousness. When I asked each of these creators, like name something that they feel represented themselves and the argument they're trying to make in its totality, each and every person featured in the book were able to point to a specific video. Not the fact that it was viral, not the fact that it was popular, but it was like this is the intentionality I put behind it. One thing that actually didn't make it to the book was me sitting down with Trey Melvin and talking about his Normal Andrea character and him going through the nuances of like how that character reflected upon himself, how that character was a vehicle for him to introduce a lot of his own identity into the world, to have very harsh and hard conversations with himself through the lens of like a feminized character, but at the same time, a lot more masculine, presenting a lot more powerful than he might have felt in his everyday life. And Jessica Lee was able to sit down and talk about how creating art online gave her the courage, gave her the access to create art in so many different ways. Like Jessica Lee, she's done a lot of different things. She's been an author, she's been an executive producer, a screenwriter, a comedian, a host. She has done every single hat and worn every single hat you can think of. And because of that, she's able to reflect on what she has been doing through content creation and through the internet. That was her experimenting with the fact that she didn't want to just be one thing. She had a lot of different talents that were coming to fruition. And because the internet is spontaneous, she's able to do that. So yeah, I think that like the difference is always that intentionality. I believe it was like last year or 2 years ago, someone asked what is the difference between a content creator and an influencer. And I think content creators create the culture of what you see online, and influencers merely profit from it. And that's the difference that I really want to capture between all of these different artists and figuring out who had the gumption and have the truth telling skills that encompass what an artist is supposed to do in this day and age.
So my grandparents mean a lot to me, a ton to me, right? And you mentioned in the book how your grandfather had this library, it sounds like, and I want to understand that how did that library shape your subconscious and your love of language?
It taught me that first and foremost, knowledge is accessible, but like to be a knowledgeable person, you have to commit your life to it, right? This is it's very much I don't ever I say this a lot that I don't think intelligence is a virtue. I think it's a cultivated skill. Like it's not really I think most people would say that they enjoy learning, and a lot of people would say that they enjoy the feeling of being smart, but it's very different than pursuing wisdom and trying to figure out how to make knowledge not work for you, but to be a thing you pursue in favor of understanding, right? And having that library easily accessible, it taught me to not overemphasize knowledge as a thing that gets me more things or makes me more powerful, but it just helps me make connections with other people and some perspectives of the world a lot easier. I infamously don't like self help books. I infamously have a real like serious politic about like a book that tells you how the world is rather than allowing you to come to your own formulated opinion of what the world can be based on your own personal truth. And I think that library definitely contributed to it, but also the fact that I used to just play on it all the time. I used to climb the shelves, fall a lot, but it taught me that books are just things, right? They're meant to be played with. They're meant to be knocked around. I don't hold a single book sacred. Even my personal book, I don't believe it's written in and or it's not lived in until you've written in it a lot. If you go through any number of the books on my personal library, you will see annotations on every single book I've actually read and scribbles and like little moments of me just like making the presence and the activity of reading a known thing. And I think that library contributed a lot to it. That knowledge requires you to be a little bit messy. Knowledge requires that you soil the tools that, by which you're going through the process of learning. And knowledge is a thing you cultivate every single day. I don't even believe that you have to read every single book you get because of that reason. That like, you buy a book that's really a promise to yourself that you are trying to dedicate yourself to eventually get to that point. And I think all that comes back to the moment that my grandfather started building that library for himself. And now for me also building my library. My library is the most secret space in my entire apartment. And as it grows, I feel myself expanding my love. It's getting to a point. I have to buy a new bookshelf, but I do favor also just electronically gathering books, and trying to find a way to situate reading as a habit, as an everyday perspective, and as a thing I do out of love and joy of the act.
So besides your grandfather bookshelf, it's coming to my mind right now. Did you actually witness your grandfather actually sit down and reading or reading the paper or something? Because I my friends on live recently, like, how many guys did you see reading growing up? Like in the neighborhood, going to the barber shop, how many guys you started sitting there for no reason, just reading, and not many people have even seen men just reading, you know?
For me, it's like so many different levels of that. Like my grandfather was a prolific reader. Like he had a newspaper in his hand at all times, but he also had like a Jet magazine subscription. Um, and that Jet magazine subscription, he was always picking through it. But at the same time, my father, Van Collins, he was a comic book reader. He had a huge comic book collection, and so like in the off chance that you don't see him reading the book, he's reading a comic book. And I think it compounded my understanding that reading is just a thing you do. But I think my love for reading actually was also very self motivated. I was naturally a very quiet kid. I did not like talking to people. I was very shy. I was extremely shy. My mom even reminded me recently that, like, you used to always take it personally when someone didn't want to be your friend. And I was like, and not a lot of people want to be my friend. So I got very into reading as a form of escapism, but then also because, like, the black and white of the page is the most honest people ever got to be, right? And the black and white of the page is like when you're dealing with a bunch of different neurological things as a kid that you don't have the words for. The honesty of the words just being so matter of fact can be the most beautiful thing you can experience. And then that grows into you loving reading and loving words as an art form, the things that you can do with it by telling the truth, but also deceiving the reader at the same time, which is the black and white of the page is and was the most beautiful thing I could experience. And I think that was deeply internal. Um, and yeah, I don't think I've seen a lot of other black men sitting down to read a book on their own, even though reading is a very ephemeral thing that, like, I think a lot of different people say they do, and that people do. and you know that you read to get through your day, but the act and the intentionality of it is something that I think people build a very personal relationship with. It's not like praying, it's you do it at your own pace, you do it at your own spirituality, and you do it at your own love of what you're doing. And therefore, you don't really think about showing other people that you're doing it.
This is a wonderful segue that just happened like in real time. So my wonderful friend said, your necklace pendant enhances the shape of your eyes, and that's gorgeous. A compliment to you, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
You have a part in the book about being a brown skinned guy as we are, and about feeling like undesirable or feeling like yeah, like not as desired. Like speak about that part of the book for me. That was a very major chapter in the book for me.
That chapter came from such a personal space. That's why, like, when I was pitching this book, I was like, me and my agent were trying to practice like a lot of different ways that we were going to talk about it, because we're like, this is like truly genre defined. Like, I don't like picking just one genre. I like leaping between a bunch of different ones to see what the purpose and the outcome of a thing can be. Because I feel like words are things you play with, and words are things you experiment with, but so are genres. Um, and within that, I wanted this book to capture in real time, like the fact that I myself am a digital artist in the Black Arts Renaissance, in this Black digital arts Renaissance. So what does that look like for me? And one element that just kept coming up was like, the conversations on desirability and the conversations on like, am I pretty enough to make it? Or am I desirable enough for people to want to follow me and to engage with me and to listen to the things that I have to say? And within that, I think, I go back to my first ever published essay, the one I'm still proud of, which was Black Boys in Bird Chess, that's on Medium right now. And in that essay, I was being like very raw and real about like reflecting on a lot of the different harm I experienced as a dark skinned person. Like I'm the darkest member of my family, along with my sister. Our experiences are very shaped by that. How people perceive a young Black boy based off of like if he is too thin, or if he's too fat, or if he's too one way of a color, I think compounds to how we move through the rest of our life and we move through the rest of our existence. And I think within those moments of talking about feeling like if I am desirable enough to be able to make it as an artist, and desirable enough to be able to be confident in myself, sitting in front of a bunch of people and navigating the fact that I am insanely talented, um, it becomes a part of the dialogue. And I think that this is a part of the dialogue for a lot of different Black creators. And so I really wanted to shed more light upon that perspective and that reality that like we just fundamentally go through. It is a question of like, am I presentable enough? It is a question of like the fact that I need to show up in a certain way, and like I would be attacked in a certain way. Or my perspectives when I am critiquing someone who is a bit differently aligned on that desirability angle, the reactions I get for making a ruckus and being, of consequence to the offenses I'm seeing or the misguided attempts I'm seeing, all of that mattered fundamentally to the conversation. Um, and that all that will impact whether or not they greet me with kindness or with harshness. Um, and I think it's always going to be a part of the conversation as long as you people are online, or as long as desirability and as long as like racism hinges opinions on us based on how we look, which you always will. How wide our nose are, how wide our lips are, whether or not we look tired, whether or not we look dark, like all these things goes into both how we perceive our own success, but also how people perceive our worthiness to be in a space that we're in.
So you definitely felt those things, you wrote those things, then you pressed it. But like how do you see your desirability now that you're doing all of these things? And you got a book that's out and you're doing the tour, you're doing the press. Like how do you see yourself now?
I think that I still am wrestling with a bit of like the angle, I think. Like, it's you always second guess like if you have done something better, if you've done something more efficiently, but also what would have happened in your career if you looked a certain way. And if you can profit off of that a bit more than anything else. Um, I think that there is, me being Black and also being queer is a fundamental part of my identity. Is why I talk about it a lot in the book. Um, and so, like, within that, you deal with a space that is inherently about desire and about desirability and about like how attractive you are, how immediate sight that people could talk about you. And so, I do periodically feel and come across situations where I'm made majorly aware of how, like, if you were more desirable, this opportunity would be given to you. We would have given you this publicity. We would have given you this award. But because you're not, you need to make talent compensate for a lot more than we probably would have asked for someone else. And so, like, it's just, I think it's just fundamentally going to be a part of the industry. And I think that where I am now is that I accept the spaces that accept me. I accept the spaces that are for me. If it's not for me, it's not for me. And I'd rather move in a space that wants and desires my presence than to move into spaces that is going to make it a hard time or is giving me acceptance with an apology expected for me, you know? Um, and so, like, that fear doesn't hamper me. I've never really been a person who's hampered by a space that doesn't want me because I'm like, I've been disliked since I was a kid, you know? And so because of that, I navigate with a bountiful mindset of like, the worst thing they can say is yes, because then I have to do it. I have to show up. I have to be there and be present. Um, but the idea that someone would reject me from a desire angle or like fight me because of a desire angle, I know a lot of big words that I can call it a bunch of different things, and all of it will be honest and true. But that doesn't have anything to do with what I can do with my own two hands and my own forward moving mentality. You know.
Question from the comment. I love the active audience, man. My brother asked, was there any fear of success once you reached a certain level of desirability? There any fear of success?
I don't think I've ever really feared success because even with desirability, I know that the skill is there to match it. I've never suffered from imposter syndrome. I've suffered from a deep loathing and disappointment of myself for the abilities I have. Like if I am not where I think I should be based on my skill level or like my dedication level, then I'm more angry at myself that I didn't do the extra bit. And I had to learn to chill on myself, honestly. When I hit 30, I'm 31 years old now, but when I hit 30, I really had to stop and look at myself and just go, like, what I have in front of me and what I have on my table is exactly what was meant for me. There's nothing else I could have done differently to have changed where I am or what I could have. And I think that accepting that bit of myself has given me a lot more ability to have grace, and like being able to move. I will agree. I've gotten a lot more handsome than I was as a kid. I affirm that my mom said she didn't raise no ugly babies, and I agree with her. I agree with her. She did not raise a single ugly baby. She didn't birth a single ugly child. And so as I'm able to reflect my own sense of self confidence, and I'm able to back it up with the skill and the talent and like the hard work and dedication of staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning, writing and writing and rewriting and going like I don't know what I'm missing from this passage, but it's missing something. And so we're gonna keep rewriting it until it's where it needs to be. Um, I think that I am not afraid of the opportunities that come my way because of it. I'm just hesitant about making rash decisions and like living to regret what other decisions could have been on the table that I could have walked towards.
So speaking of desirability, man, another major topic in the book was talking about sex workers, right? So I had various guests on the show speaking about sex workers in the past and things like that. So speak about like how is it different now with OnlyFans and all these other platforms.
Hmm.
In your process, how did the old school sex workers look at these advances in technology? How do they see it when it comes to sex work?
I think a lot of people like there's been so many different opinions about it. Um, in my approach and in my like even my journalism outside of the book, I've spoken to a lot of different OnlyFans models, but also a lot of different like sex workers overall, and the perspectives have been so varied. I think like the main and consistent thing is that OnlyFans deeply saturated the market, like oversaturated the market with creators and content, and to the point that a lot of different conversations had to start about like what is it doing to the overall budget. A lot of OnlyFans and sex workers are talking about like how broke they actually are, right? They're talking about like hey, I actually don't we're getting a lot of money from what you see. And like, you know, a lot of people are dealing with different levels of banking information and banking issues. And like, because the market is so oversaturated and anyone could just grab a camera phone and start doing it and see like them pulling in a certain amount of money, it can change the game fundamentally to the point that they're like, I have to subsidize what I'm doing online with some other physical work, right? And so like it has caused a bunch of different conversations about like who gets to do what, who has a right to be in the space. I've seen some OnlyFans creators talking about like they don't like when celebrities like just make an account and try to rack in as much money as possible because they're like that co-ops so much of the space. It takes so much money out of everyone's pockets, and it becomes a competition of like excess and like want and need because they're like that money that you might see if an OnlyFans creator is a celebrity and they put up an account for 49.99 a month, right? An outrageous sum. They said that usually when they do that, immediately 10 content creators just lost a subscriber because they're repositioning this month towards that focus. And so there's a lot of different diverse opinions and perspectives. I think like another angle that I've seen pop up is like how many people end up retiring this year, or even the ability to retire, or like the conversation of if making content on this level can alienate you from other opportunities in general. One big conversation that I've been having with other content creators, especially black and queer content creators, was how many play the hustle of being a creator.
Yo, yo. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'm
Think we
back.
had a little glitch. That's all. A little glitch.
Gotta love it. Um, where was I? But as I was saying, mostly was
Yeah,
just that, like, you
yeah.
know, black and queer content creators have had to roll over to doing sex work, and having to make their large part of their income come from this kind of work because a lot of what they're doing is based off of just the numbers they get from a creative rewards program or like a creative partner program. They're getting their money directly from the app because they're not getting brand deals as much. And what does that turn into overall and over time? Like if so many X amount of black content creators are doing this work and they have no other choice but to do it. Or, you know, to them, they have no other choice but to do it in order to make their dreams come true or X, Y, and Z. How does that roll over into them performing in that way for survival? And is that ethical or is that even necessary? Or like, there's a lot of different conversations that I think is compounded into the dialogue of what's going on and how sex work has changed because of digital culture. But at the end of the day, it's also still a performance. There's still an element of it that these people are engaging with the same level of artistry that a lot of content creators have to who aren't doing sex work. Um, there is a vision that they have to have. There is editing skills. There is a level of distance they need to maintain between themselves and their audience to create the lens and the gaze itself. And a lot of them also do successfully roll that over into being artists in their own way. And it's also very interesting how doing sex work and being a sex worker influence some of your art. It's something I started thinking about when I saw the skill level in an artist like Cardi B, and how she's able to perform and execute a performance on stage being directly correlated to the fact that she is unapologetic about her past and about her reality as a stripper. You know, those things go into how she had a dialogue about what she does on stage, how she's able to give a show, and how she's able to show up as a artist and as a performer and as a celebrity.
And, my friends and I saw some articles months ago about like, college costs so much now.
Mm-hmm.
They have less grants, less student loans and everything. So people that's going to be a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer, like, you know what? I'm gonna do a little OnlyFans on the side to help pay for school. Or you know
Listen,
what? I made so much money, I'm gonna just forget school. Like, I'm gonna just do this.
I have $100,000 according to today in student loan debt. I don't know what it got that bad. I started off with just only 15K in student loan debt when I was in my undergrad. When I read that undergrad, by the time I went to grad school, it bumped up to 95K, and now we're at 100K. Um, it's a very ridiculous establishment we're living under. And I think that's definitely reflective in how the youth think. Like, I think there is an element of like, putting yourself in debt to go to school, or like doing X, Y, and Z, when like a lot of the world is telling them all they want from them is to perform as sex workers, is to make sure they have enough money to avoid being harmed in any way. And it just so happens that the easiest and most efficient way that they have found to do that is the very thing that gets demonized. Now, there's a conversation on if it should be demonized at all. I think it's also equally and actually more important to like analyze in this dialogue and in this conversation. But also, there's very real reality that like being able to be a performer is still a legitimate form of art. Like, do we alienate sex work and the artists who work within that lens as artists because it's less favorable or less appealing to the appetite to think of them as people who do a performance? Or is it actually a lot more valuable for us to analyze the work that they're doing from a point of view that it is art and it is an inherent part of the culture? It says a lot about where we place the desire and where we place pleasure and where we place the argument of art as a tool to be. Is sex and is sex work something capable of being art and a tool for us to create a conversation about the political realities of a lot of people doing the work?
And we can pivot off of that to just being an online person, period, like streaming things of that nature. I go to a lot of schools, talk to the youth for years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And teachers don't understand whenever these kids are saying, I'm going to be a video streamer for video games. I'm going to do Twitch. The
Mm-hmm.
teachers are pretty much the age gap difference is like, you're going to do what? But these kids know the people they follow make way more money than the teachers. They make way more money
Yeah.
than most athletes. Matter of fact, some rappers stop rapping. I'm just going to be on bit like T Pain and T Grizzly.
Mm-hmm.
I made so much on video games versus going to do shows. So talk about the transition of today's mindset. Like I'm gonna go online, man.
Even Offset, I believe, said out loud that like he said for as much money as he makes as an A-list rapper, he was like these streamers and these esports players make more money than he ever will. And it's because of the endorsements and the opportunities and the fact that they can captivate the audience of the youth for a lot longer. And plus it's a global market. And I think that people like hear this and they say that, oh, that's not a fruitful future. But I'm like, if a lot of kids were willing to put their bodies on the line to play sports from the age of 5 all the way up until they're like what 30, were willing to put their body at risk to do just that. If they were willing to do that, they were willing to sit in front of a camera for every day of their life and try to make their numbers get larger or get large enough for them to rake in like a lot of money, right? I remember when Streamer University happened with Kai Cenat a few years ago, and people were shocked at like the publicity that it got and how many people tried to enroll and how many people wanted to put themselves out there in that way. But I'm like, no, it makes perfect sense because the amount of people who apply for Streamer University are probably equal to the amount of people who try to get into the NFL every year, or the NBA. It's a comparable system, and it's a opportunity for them to make money by being just themselves, which is what I think is attractive to so many young people, especially young Black people. The ability to just be on camera and be who you are, and people like that and give you money to continue to do it, is incredibly lucrative and incredibly appetizing to a lot of young people. And I think a lot of teachers are starting to hear that and are trying to find a way around it. I've seen people try to find ways to incorporate streaming and streaming culture into their lessons and into like how they talk to these students. Um, I will be happier once like a lot of them realize that there's a lot of ways that you can be happy doing what you want to do that have nothing to do with money. And I think that a part of the culture is very dangerous. I do think a part of the culture requires a certain level of conversation. Um, but I think that within the responsible use of streaming and the responsible use of these goals and aspirations of very young people is an actual reflection of where we place education and what we place as a vital, important thing in front of them. Like we told these kids that at the end of the day, all that matters is money, and then they go and pursue things that give them money out the gate. That's more so on us than it is on them for painting that as an ideal future.
So the question was, is this propaganda to make the nation illiterate disguised as art?
I think that that is kind of the concern every generation kind of has. We come back to a different thing that is painted as like deleterious or like dangerous to the youth every single generation. I think it was like literal Cicero who was like, "Oh, writing words down in a book is going to destroy kids and make them unruly." Like it's been happening for over like 4,000 years. There's always something that pops up that we are increasingly concerned with making kids illiterate. Now, there are things that I'm deeply concerned about, like generative AI. I'm very worried about what that is doing to kids. But I'm also concerned about what Coco Melon is doing to babies. There's like so many different things that I think pop up in our world and pop up within our nation and pop up within our civilizations that pose a threat to the youth before we get to streaming or digital culture, right? I think that the willingness and propensity to read books has been fading for a while. And it requires you to prioritize reading as a medium to your kids. A few people who complain about like their kids not reading today, because now I'm old enough to have a lot of friends who have kids old enough to be of concern with that. I'm like, well, you don't even read. And so it's like we talked about earlier, like if you don't show that reading or books are a sacred thing in your household, how are they going to follow that instinct? Do you want them to do it because you told them to, or do you want to do it because you earnestly feel like it's good for them? If it's good for them, it's good for you too. So there's a conversation there that needs to be had. I think before we get to the pieces on propaganda to make the youth more illiterate, there's a lot more things we have to address before we get to the streamer of it all.
So let's go to this, right? So Castanet and Speed, some of the top streamers in the world. Like they are the apex of streaming. And these
Mhm.
two guys being pretty much like, you know what, like put my hands over this streaming thing. I'm not even. And then Castanet using the platform now. He's learning how to read in real time on his platform. Talk about that.
I felt it was so sad to see people mocking him for trying to look up words while he was trying to read. But I think that is the reality that we're dealing with. I worked as a writing tutor in undergrad, and number one thing I noticed that freshman students were getting increasingly more illiterate. And I think after the COVID, it's like I applied to be a tutor before. I talked to some other people who work in pedagogy, and we were like, yeah, adult illiteracy is going to come back. Is because a lot of people are only being passed up. Like their kids are literally being pushed forward by just having to pretend they have certain capabilities and skills before they ever actually are tested to see if they can actually do it. There's been a few kids that I was personally tutoring where I was like, I don't think you understand that you're functionally illiterate. Like you're looking at me and you're trying to do the things to me that's worked with your teachers, and like they have to manage over like 30 students. So like of course they have to just move on. But it's me sitting right next to you as a one-on-one. I'm seeing you try to manipulate like out of the situation of addressing the fact that you don't know the difference between like a subject and a predicate, or a noun and a verb, and you're struggling being able to identify what either is, and therefore like if you can't identify that, then you're not really comprehending what you're reading, and like that's an issue. And so having to roll back their education all the way back to where they actually are, which for most kids was actually just third grade, and having to work their way forward, like it's a big issue that I feel like is going on right now. And I think that illustrating that self improvement is for the better. My red flag though was in like the fact that he is focusing and fixating on self help books. Again, I don't like self help books at all. Because of this very reason that we're seeing that people turn them into goalposts or keys for salvation and for like what you're supposed to do to be a successful person. I don't even like the artist's way as a book. When in reality, I'm like, it might be more constructive to show people that you can enjoy reading whatever you prefer to read. You can read fiction and receive the same life lessons that they're kind of spoon feeding you in a self help book, but it makes you dig for the answers yourselves. And so you respect the answers you get a lot more. Um, I think reading should be a hobby that is done slow. So I don't rate people by how many books you read. I think that's a lot what was going on was like him trying to speed run to like, I gotta read 50 books a year, I gotta read 100 books a year. I had to read the 40, I had to read Rich Dad Poor Dad and have a cultivated sense of what capitalism means to me and how it can reward me. rather than like I read, Percy Jackson, and I just really ride with Greek mythology. And that's just me talking about how I want to treat people and my loved ones, or think about my own disabilities, or what is possible for me to do as someone who is not a voracious or a highly adept reader. And I think it makes people more comfortable with the hobby of reading and eventually disliking things that you read, which I think is an important thing to have as an instinct if you are a voracious enough reader. The understanding that something the most important thing you can do as a book reader is to dislike a book or dislike a story, and that contributes something to your own education, the education of other people overall.
Yes, let's keep it going on the books, man. You think about Toni Morrison in the book. So tell us, first of all, what does Toni Morrison mean to you as a writer, as a consumer of information? Then we'll go from there.
Toni Morrison has done more for the state of Ohio than I can ever hope to do. Toni Morrison, infamously from Ohio, infamously. I saw someone suggest that she was from New York recently on Threads, and it irritated me because I'm like, if you ever read anything with Toni Morrison, you know that she is the number one spokesperson for the state of Ohio. But I think that Toni Morrison, if there's any writer who influenced my writing style the most, one of them would be Toni Morrison. Her approach to horrifying concepts and the unapologetic like realities that truth telling can enforce upon you as the writer, but also on the reader, is pivotal and powerful. I love how she approached race. I love how she approached the conversations on like intersectionality and like domestic harms that can exist within our own community, but also like how unapologetic she is about the stance of love, community, and family. That there are certain wrongs that you can do as a person that can impact your community deeply. And I deeply appeal to that idea of like rejecting the white gaze in your writing for that reason, right? She talked about specific harms that could exist independently of white people coming in. While yes, racism and whiteness can be the first call for that airborne sickness, at the same time, there is ways that is being perpetuated and continued within our community, independent of a white person ever appearing on the page. And I felt that that is commendable enough. I've always felt this. I remember, being so excited in my undergrad when we had a survey course on all Toni Morrison's literature. It was the first time in our college's history that we ever had a survey course of a first of all, of a black person, first and foremost, but of a non-white person. And we didn't have a Shakespeare course that semester. Some people were upset, and there's a lot of people. I think I was one of two black students in a Toni Morrison course, but in the process of them having to confront the books and confront the literature and confront what was going on inside of those books, it was having them challenge the canon that they accepted was just what good literature was. Um, and I thought about that when writing my first ever essay with Ebony, where we were looking at a survey and discussing Toni Morrison. And I deeply appreciated the fact that she actually eventually got to reading that that essay that I wrote. And it was the last thing I ever saw of her before she passed, was that she posted it on her website. But I think that Toni Morrison is just great. There's nothing I could say or do that can encompass everything her work and her writing has contributed to me, other than like there is no forever for the culture without Toni Morrison, honestly.
So we all know that Toni Morrison books have been banned for a while now in a lot of places. But
Mhm.
I saw recently The Color Purple, Alice Walker, by the current administration has been banned from a lot of things. So what's your thoughts on like Color Purple, Toni Morrison, Baldwin, these guys being banned so much today's administration, man?
Book bans, I think, are always going to be a part of the conversation about like how Black people are policed, especially within an educational sense. I think that if you want to talk about anything being propaganda, I deeply feel that the elimination of our stories within schools, especially public schooling, is an attempt to control how and which way our politics will lean. I think it was Ta-Nehisi Coates who said that art informs politics and politics informs art. Art is what we imagine the world to be, and politics is how we perceive the world, and those things are go hand in hand, right? And I think that when you are watching people remove access to specific perspectives, specific truths, especially when we're talking about the storyteller as a truth teller, right? It's an attempt to control how people react and stipulate their own politics. There's a phrase that's been thrown around this month a lot, which is racial insecurity, which comes from, I think, an inability or a refusal or like a lack of consumption of Black art or art within your own culture that speaks directly to you about the issues that you face or about the issues that you have kind of suppressed as just a matter of fact. A thing that goes hand in hand with existing, like breathing. You don't think about breathing at all. You don't think about certain harms that happen to you. I talk about this in terms of the BAFTA thing that recently happened, where the unfortunate incident that happened to Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler when they were receiving their award. That when you don't think about things like disability and how disability can impact you, sometimes there are situations where when you're finally asked to discuss it, you're not really sure which way to start on, right? The harm can exist and you can exist realizing that something is happening that you don't agree with, but not really having the navigation of the tools to know like what exactly is the thing that's upsetting me. And I think part of that causes that is the banning of this literature when you can look at different situations and you're like something is not right, and now I don't really have the words to put to what I feel is upsetting, and so I'm going to attack what feels the most relevant in this moment. And sometimes that can be a bit of a sloppy way to approach it, and sometimes we can ask for grace for it, but at the same time I think navigating these bands and navigating what we're seeing is it just has to be about swallowing the fact that this is an attempt to control us. And that's why I think it's also really important that when I see that people are instead going the opposite direction. When a book is banned, you put a lot more support behind it. I've always heard of Toni Morrison growing up. She's been banned. I want to say like I think that my entirety of my life she has been banned. But at the same time, I've heard of The Bluest Eye, and I've heard of Sula, and I've heard, of The Color Purple. I watched The Color Purple with Steven Spielberg. And I've known all of these things to be a part of my literary canon. But at the same time, because they were banned, they just been apart from me. But those stories being remembered and echoing into my adulthood to the point that I could find them eventually is a foundational thing that I feel is of constructive importance and what you need to do when facing the banning of our art and the banning of our literature.
Before I move on, what's your all-time favorite Toni Morrison book?
That's a hard question to answer, but I'm gonna say Song of Solomon. A Song of Solomon is my favorite
Yo,
one.
I'm right there with you. Between that and Sula, it's like I like those the most. I haven't read the whole
I,
canon just yet, but those two, uh,
I feel like some people consider it a hot take because Song of Solomon is the first time she really stepped out of her traditional field of like discussing women and the harms facing women. And even then, she still had to sneak it in there about how Black men can exist in a state of harm with Black women by proximity, but also by the institutional traumas that we're facing. But I feel like the rhythm that she found in that book of creating a flawed character within Milkman and discussing how he can find his way through. There's an element of it that felt very bell hooks, of like him trying to come out the other side as finally being a man of virtue. And whether or not he succeeds at that is kind of ambivalent to me at the end. But I feel deeply that Toni Morrison was trying to not apologize, but to address the Black men of the time who probably have felt that her books didn't paint us in a perfect image, that like the emphasis isn't perfection in Song of Solomon. It is the journey to trying to be good. Like the emphasis being that like we have a
hey,
biblical character on a journey to being a good
let
person.
me
He's
just
trying his best.
let me just say real quick. I was a part of a book club that I cherished for like 3 years straight. I was the
Mm-hmm.
only guy in the book club, right? Cool. We read so much Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Jesmyn Ward. I could just keep on naming. There was no real things for me to like redeem from these books as a black man reading these books. There was nothing really like a great guy, like yeah, like that guy. It was all bad for us for the most part. I'm like,
Mm. It's a very tricky road to walk. I think like when like we're trying to investigate. Because I think when we're looking at these characters in these stories and we're trying to figure out like what is the role of the black man in a lot of black literature. Like I remember my grandmother, she once said, like when talking about the four colored girls, her first and like most pivotal remark was, "It doesn't make the black man look good." And I felt like hearing her say that, I heard her speaking from a very specific point of view within her background as a black woman who grew up in like civil rights era, right? And it is a very tricky way to navigate. But I think even within that, there is something underneath the current of like the men who are in these books. Most often of them are like having a critique or an observation to those characters that is like, these are black men who have completely abandoned their empathy in black women, and like they have completely abandoned this idea of giving back. And I've always been one where I'm like, a villain is someone you can still latch on to because a villain can teach you a lesson, or they can instill with you a perspective or a question of like, am I like this character at all? Is there something that I'm seeing like in their selfishness, or is there something I'm seeing in their cruelty, or is there a moment where I have been unnecessarily cruel to my sister, right? And have disregarded her emotions. And I think that in trying, like, I have a very hot take about representation, that I feel like we pursue being represented and being reflected more than we pursue a story that tells a full truth that we can walk away with. And I think that when looking at so many of these books with the Black arts movement, right, these books are trying to tell a story with truth in it. And I think that a part of that struggle is going to inherently be about latching on to the lesson more than it's latching onto the character. Because I'm like, there's other characters and other people who've written great stories that include black men who have a virtue to them. Like I can think of so many different Baldwin stories, right? Where the black man is illustrated at a specific point. And now we have so many other juggernauts, like my brothers in black art and black literature right now. We have Tiny Easy Coates introducing, I believe, this water dancer. And we have, it's just like the list goes on. There's so many of us putting out books now that I'm no longer able to say like, there's where are we? There's none of us out here. I can't. I'm gonna be real. Whenever I see an author say like, "Oh, there's nothing like this out there," I kind of call them a liar because I'm like, there's so many of us now. It's like you just open a tweet, just open your Twitter and search the word Black author, you'll find one of us. But at the same time, like we now have the opportunity to be represented, and I'm seeing the stories that have a lesson to them or a truth, or even the emphasis on a complicated character is being lost, and now characters are being like hollowed down to just one singular point. And I want the stories of the old to come back, of like literary works that speak to the story. And sometimes might have a character you find it really hard to latch onto. Like Morrison gets a lot of gripe for her stories and how she represents us at one point. But at the same time, she did not write easy to love female characters also. There's so many different versions of the female characters she introduced as black women who are deeply flawed individuals. And the difference is that she is just asking us to find something to love that can understand how a character can turn into what we're seeing on the page.
So one of my favorite parts of the book, you was talking about Angela Bassett and Lawrence Fishburne and their performances in some of the early parts of their career, and then they do the Tina Turner story and like the awards that it didn't get at that time, right? But speak about
Mm-hmm.
like black performers, music and movies, not just movies, but like in the hard time we've always had when it comes to like the award season and stuff like that.
I think, the mainstream awards have never really saw fit to include us because it never really thought to when it was incepted. I think that it struggles with understanding what Black art is meant to contribute to the mainstream art forms, and it hits a hiccup when it has to ask those questions. Like I think even about like how we are categorized in so many different things, right? We were urban at one point, and then we were colored, and then like the categories are never fully able to encompass what we're trying to do at any given time. Um, I think about how people reacted to Beyonce winning the Country Music Award, right? And what does that mean to them that like they don't perceive what she did on that album as actual country music? And I think that there's a sickness within how capitalism has plagued art and how the awards and accolades of art has kind of rippled, in that black art no longer considers it healthy to only speak to blackness, or is trying to caveat everything is doing to a more mainstream appeal. I've lost stories that I wanted to sell that, like, truth be told, forever for the culture. This is my firstborn. I've written maybe 3 other books, and they struggle to make it out because of how it considers what commercial or mainstream to be. And commercial and mainstream audiences might not understand the impact of writing a character who is struggling with the fact that the world wants him to assimilate basically to whiteness and to achieve wealth and status and to leave behind his community, but he is actually very much in love with just staying where he is. And people kind of see that as like the adventure hasn't truly begun because he hasn't abandoned his home. But like, that's for a black man and a black boy, that's something that would be very partial. When you leave home, you leave behind everything you do. When you come back as the alien thing. That's my experience when I went to college, and now I'm like, I don't feel like I can relate to anything back at home anymore. Is that something I have to sacrifice, or is that something that is what the system is meant to have done to me? You know, and I think that when I look at Angela Bassett not getting the things that she deserves within the industry, and she's like the contemplation of what's going on with the Sinners, uh, award show run right now, and like trying to ask the question of, does Sinners become less valid because it didn't get the specific awards, or is the system of the institutions to blame? And is that system and institution deeply flawed because it did not see merit in giving it what it truly and clearly deserved? Is this a subjective conversation, or is this a conversation of just what's black and white should have been? Um, and I think that it's going to be one that the system wrestles with. But I am happier to see, and I will be happier to embrace the idea that we are putting more energy behind institutions that we own. Who's to say that an NAACP Image Award isn't more valuable than an Oscar? And that's something that we should have a conversation about. And I think that equally so, the institutions like the NAACP and other Black-owned institutions should treat itself like as worthy or more worthy than these other institutions.
So Ryan Coogler get a big award last night, man. Just a couple hours, matter of hours ago. So what's your thoughts about like Ryan Coogler, the first Black Panther in particular, and Sinners, like both of those breaking so much ground and inspiring future Black creators and writers? Thought about that.
I deeply feel that without Black Panther, a lot of Black authors would not have a career right now. I think that even down to Children of Blood and Bone, like Tommy Adeyemi, there has been a consistent issue with publishing seeing Black sources worthy. I released a story called like when will the world see Black boys as magical, and it was with Tor, which I believe has changed his name since the article has went up. But in that article, I was kind of wrestling with the reality that like fantasy writers and fantasy audiences don't really want Black people in that landscape at all. Like, it's hard for a lot of non-Black readers to latch onto our characters, into our protagonists, and they have a lot of issues with immersion with our characters because a lot of what we're talking about is completely based on not involving them in a traditional sense. Like, this it's really hard for them to see themselves in a griot when they are so used to bards and musicians. And so they skip over the cultural nuances and they just flatten everything. Or worse, which I feel like it's worse, I've seen people champion a book that they haven't even read. And there's something even more blasphemous about that. You might even see me in the comments of a few reviews or like a few book listings where I'm like, I've seen you at this point list this book every year for the last 3 years. I've not seen one review of this book yet. Like, are you going to talk about the book? Are you going to say out loud what you've seen in the book? Because 9 times out of 10, I've just seen people just not even read or consume these stories. And I feel like that is a travesty. But I do feel deeply that what Ryan Coogler has done has illustrated the power of the imagination, especially for Black men. I have found that a lot of white readers struggle with reading Black men in fantasy. not black men period, but there's something about like the approach to black men in fantasy that I feel is a societal issue. But I've always said that I feel like there's a segregation issue in publishing, not a diversity one. I feel like diversity is just a cleaner way to say that there's a segregationist ideology at play within an industry. And I think that Ryan Coogler is making bold steps in violating and like crossing the boundaries of what people perceive black authors able to do, but especially black men in these landscapes. I don't think Ta-Nehisi Coates releasing that Black Panther story wasn't a fluke. Him rolling in the colonial beads and then that becoming the story later on. The work that Christopher Priest did with Black Panther as a character, the amount of black authors coming out in comics right now. For my roommate Morgan Hampton, who is currently releasing the Milestone books this week, I literally on Wednesday, and Dorado Quick in his work with the Flash. Like I think the opportunity for us to tell stories is powerful, but I think it's also even more powerful seeing the industry having to contort around Ryan Coogler as a juggernaut in speculative fiction and fantasy, to the point that he's now going to be directing X-Files, showrunning X-Files. I think that's the highest badge of honor, is that like he has transcended, not, I don't want to say transcended race because I don't believe in that, but I think that giving a black creator the helm of a non-black institution says a lot about what they see that this creator is able to prove. Not that it wasn't, not they see that it's in him now, but the thing that he's always been able to do, which is true for all of us, that we're able to tell any story we want. We love telling black stories, and I'm always going to tell a black story, but there's a very clear difference in the fact that black people aren't trusted to tell universal stories as much as white creators are. There's so many white creators who are telling things from a black perspective and not doing a great job at it, that it's like, well, could we do any worse?
I think a real cool thing for me, they say in sports is a copycat league, right? The Golden State
Mm-hmm.
Warriors do one thing, and then all these teams for years try to make another Steph Curry. In the in the
Mm-hmm.
in the creating spaces, like whenever Black Panther came out, all this Afrofuturism stuff that came behind it for years, I love
Mm-hmm.
that. So with Sinners exploding, I'm in the movie theater like, great, because they're going to think, oh, y'all want black vampires? Cool. So all these books will come out. I'm sure books,
Black
comic
Southern
books,
Gothic.
graphic novels. It's gonna be a flood of that.
Victor Lavelle, he got brought on to do a bunch of new stories for Marvel because of it. They had Victor Lavelle doing Sabretooth originally, and he crossed over. He's currently doing the Black Panther run. But Victor Lavelle, one of the foremost black men in the Black Southern Gothic and telling black horror stories. I'm looking forward to it. As someone who loves speculative fiction, I'm happy whenever this is happening. But I think that it's always going to be that reminder that we constantly have to do to the industry that, like, hey, if you just believed us the first time that this story was interesting and could be interesting, we wouldn't be having to chase after the success of another thing. But the industry is hard headed. It doesn't want to listen the first time, and it's unruly. So I look forward to more senses of ownership, like Ryan Coogler took in the training centers of like, if you guys won't believe me, I'll just do it myself, and you guys can see for yourself.
But thank you very much, man. I don't want to take too much of your time. I can talk to you forever, man. There's so many things to talk about. But your book is absolutely amazing. Tell the audience,
Mhm.
man, where could they find it? Where could they get it? It just dropped. Give them all your drops, man.
Well, Forever for the Culture, Notes from the New Black Digital Arts Renaissance is available wherever you prefer to grab your books. But especially if you're looking for a signed copy, you might want to help Reparations Club out here in Los Angeles on their bookshop. They have signed copies of the book that you guys can buy directly. And you will also be supporting a Black-owned, Black women-owned bookstore out here in California.
Thank you very, very much, man. Thank you for coming to the show. Thanks for
My
saying
pleasure.
yes. I'm always honored for each and every guest that tell me the green light. I don't take it for granted. And for my audience watching this later, another podcast coming on Thursday. I have a very, very high esteemed audio narrator gonna be on the show. Midnight Michael gonna be here on Thursday, man. So thank y'all very much. Look forward to the flyers and the links and all that stuff coming later on this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Take care.
Yes, sir.